Well, today we're going to be talking about a subject that is rarely talked about on television, I think, but really needs to be talked about, and that's suicide. And so we want to start, Chad, by just asking you about your personal experience with suicide concerning your relationship with your father.
Yeah, suicide is one of these taboo topics in church, especially taboo topics in Christianity, because there's a lot of embarrassment, a lot of shame attached to it. But my father committed suicide many years ago, but it was under unique circumstances. My father and I didn't have the best of relationship. My relationship with Jesus had put a wedge there to some degree. Before I moved overseas, I got a knock on the door from a police officer who had came and asked me, said, "Are you Chad Daniel?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "Is so-and-so your father?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "I hate to tell you, but he's deceased. We couldn't find anybody. Wanted to let you know." So I quickly made my way to where he was living, and I went into the apartment, which was walled off in caution tape because they didn't know if it was a murder. He had been there for a number of days. And so I cut the caution tape and went in through the back window. And as I walked through the apartment, I realized that this something wasn't right. I knew my dad. I knew his personality, and I knew his quirkiness. And I found a notebook that had been hidden. The investigators didn't find it. And there I found a note. And the note was directed at me and my sisters, but more directed at me. And he says, "You know, kids, the most important thing in life is money." And he had a number of issues. But the thing that struck me most was he said, "Dear Chad," he said, "I don't want you doing my funeral. I don't have anything to do with your Jesus." He said, he just chewed me out and just rebuked me and said how disappointed he was in the fact that I had this relationship with God and I was a fanatic. And I closed the book, and of course it was a very emotional time for me. As I left the living room and walked into his bedroom, by the light of the street light, I noticed that over his bed there was a picture hanging. It was a picture of me as a baby. And I thought, you know what, my father loved me. But my father had a real problem with this God whom I had given my life to 100%. And at that moment, God spoke to me, says, "Chad, though your mother forsake you, though your father forsake you," he said, "I will never leave you."
That's right.
And it was that point that I said, "God, take this event in my life and use it to touch the lives of young people around the world."
That's the thing right there.
He was able to take the mess and use it as a platform to communicate a message.
I just did a teaching a couple of weeks ago called Learning How to Fight Like a Christian. And I think that, when bad things happen to us, we do feel anger, and we certainly want to get somebody back. But the way that Jesus fought was by doing good. And so you did the best thing that you could do by taking that tragic thing that could have actually even turned into the same kind of situation for you if you wouldn't have known God. You could have just thought, well, my father hated me, I'm rejected, nothing's working. You could have went downhill with that. But you decided to take it and do something good with it. And so now you actually have special crusades around the world for teenagers specifically that are having problems with suicide. But also, a lot of adults are responding to that.
Lots of adults.
Tell us a little bit about, of course, you and I have talked privately. You've just been shocked by the number of young people that are having problems with this.
Well, the number is bigger than anybody would ever know. Unless you have an event like this, unless you're able to open up dialogue on a larger level, you can never, ever get the accurate numbers. We started doing life events probably 4 years ago, and it's an anti-suicide event. I got a phone call from a public school in Texas and said, "We've had a rash of suicides. We saw the website. We know this is what you do. Will you please come in?" When I got there, it's a public school. And the administrator said, "It is such a problem." They said, "We know that the only hope for these kids is life and is God. Will you please do what you do?" I said, "Well, it could be a problem." They said, "We don't care. We've lost too many kids. Let the message come out." And I did a generic, just a communication with the kids from a chapel perspective in the auditorium. It was 1,800 kids there. I said, "How many of you right now are dealing with thoughts of suicide? You've attempted suicide, or you are contemplating doing something because of overwhelming depression?" Over 1,000 kids raised their hand.
Wow. Wow.
And this was in a controlled environment.
Wow.
We did meetings in Africa. I've done meetings in Swaziland. Same question. How many? And thousands raise their hand, and thousands respond, come forward. Just recognizing that if I don't get some supernatural help, this supernatural thing is going to wind up taking more of me than I'm willing to give.
I think one of the things that's happening in our society today is there's just so much hopelessness for people who don't have a relationship with God. And so if you take a young person whose parents are not really actively serving God. And I'm not really even just talking about, quote, going to church. I mean having a relationship with Jesus that's living and vital. If young people don't have that hope, I mean, what is there? And so what do you find? What path are they going down mentally and emotionally that's getting them to this point of not even wanting to live?
Well, they've got such issues that show up. They've got identity issues, the sexuality, who am I, the acceptance issues, father, authority issues. We've got this
peer pressure.
Peer pressure. It goes down the line. Look at Facebook. Look at Instagram. Look at Twitter. Everybody wants who's liking me, who's accepted me. Did they like my post? Did they reject me? And so we've got this storm, this tempest in their heart, and it forces them to make decisions that are eternal based on situations that are temporary.
And it's really, would you say that is it safe to say, because I don't want to exaggerate it, are the young people today really more at risk than at any other time?
I think it is. If you look at the numbers, just from 2000 till now, the numbers have increased by tens and 20s%, of especially teenagers, not just who have attempted, but those who've actually followed through. But because there is a lack of family structure, a lack of community. We've become so involved and inward because of the media devices we have, social media, television. They're at greater risk because they're isolating themselves. Remember, when a teenager begins to isolate themselves, that's when they begin to get preyed on. And you can see the signs, the hallmarks are everywhere. They begin to cut, they begin to lose friends, they begin to do a lot of self-deprecating things, just communicating, saying, will somebody please get me out of here? I don't know what to do.
And it's sad indeed, the number of people today that they're either giving up and not wanting to live at all, or they're responding very violently to life. And I think that that's the other thing that we're seeing today. We see so many people walking into malls and shooting a bunch of people, or kids taking bombs to school and things like that. But don't you think that's just a cry for people saying that, I'm angry because there's nothing to hope for?
Well, the message of life, when communicated the way that it should be communicated, is always going to instill hope in people. And because there's such shame attached to even thinking these thoughts, most teenagers will not come out in the open and begin to just openly communicate with you, even adults for that matter, and to say, this is what I'm dealing with, can you help me? Because there's such pride that's taught that we must stand up, we must fend for ourselves. I read something the other day. I've had friends who've been in the military, and the number of veterans who are now taking their lives is off the charts, and nobody's talking about it. The number of teenagers, just because of this isolation, hopelessness, lack of community, lack of communication with family and friends, they're looking at suicide as an option. And if we don't begin to tackle this and deal with it as a church community, as believers, and communicate hope, I think it is a road that's becoming wider as we speak and as we choose to do nothing about it.
Well, Chad, we're talking about suicide.
Yeah.
And you shared earlier that your father had committed suicide. So at least if you're dealing with anything like that, you know that we at least know the pain of that, and we understand it. And I think it is something that needs to be dealt with. There's a lot of young people today that are contemplating suicide or actually committing suicide. Probably almost all of us know of someone who has done that. So I want to ask you some very pointed questions, because we want to get a little bit more to the bottom of why this is happening, but also we want to help parents and our other mentors know the signs to watch for and know how to reach out to them. So first of all, what are the top issues facing teenagers today?
Geez, that's the short list is pretty involved. Of course, issues with authority, father issues, because you've got most teenagers today are growing up in single-family households, most of that by a mother. And so there's authority issues. There's the sexual identity issue that is coming across on every platform that we could imagine. There's pornography. There's, once again, another tie into the identity issue through social media. There's peer pressure. There's acceptance. And there's this whole issue of relative truth. It's not absolute. It's more situational morality. So you combine those 4 or 5 issues, and you have young people who are truly have been blindfolded as they come into life. And because the church and because parents and because I think well-meaning people aren't willing to tackle these things head on and have become so politically correct, we can't open up dialogue that is really going to bring about any real critical thinking for them, especially as it pertains to Jesus and eternity.
So what is their view of family and God? How does a young person today look at family compared to how you and I would have?
Well, that quote nuclear family is changing. I mean, I talk to people all the time who they don't attend church regularly. They probably, I think, watch more television church, and whether they've been hurt or whether they're just too busy and the kids have too much going on. Children, I think, have a direct relationship of how they look at God as to how they get trained in the family unit.
Right.
And I think that what young people are looking for is that, is there stability? Is God going to treat me like my father, like my mother, or like my friends treat me? When the answer is no, God doesn't look at us the way others do. I think trying to communicate as we communicate to teenagers, like, look, you may be in a tough situation now, but God can make all things new. He can do good to you in every situation. But I would challenge parents, we need to begin and facilitate that now, not just wait till the kids get in a problem or when things get tough and try to knee-jerk reaction. Let's begin to establish those boundaries and lay those foundations of health, physically, emotionally, spiritually, when they're young. And then we don't have to deal with all that later.
Let's talk about some of the things that parents or mentors can watch for that would help them know that they're dealing with a teenager that's really in trouble.
Well, teenagers are experts in camouflage. They can hide in any scenario you put them in. They can change in an instant. But if you have a relationship with them, especially if they belong to you, belong to us, we can see key things. Changes in body image, the way that maybe they were taking care of themselves before, really primping and paying attention to hair and clothes, they begin to back off on that.
Now they don't care what they look like.
They don't care. That's just part of the slippery slope. Then becomes the way their communication style. How do they talk about themselves? What are they saying about themselves? What are they saying about close friends who have stuck with them? That's a real indicator. Then begin to look for the signs on the physical signs. We just did a meeting in South Africa, and we had meetings with lots of Muslim young people there. And they responded and came up and they said, look, can we talk to you? And most of the girls there came up and pulled back their shirts and just showed us cut after cut after cut to where they would be in school or at home cutting themselves.
Okay, we have to explain to people why young people do that, because I'm sure most people just don't get that at all. So why does a young person do that?
Well, from what I have gathered and what they have told me is it's a way for them to take that internal pain, externalize it, and then it'll distract them from the real issues that are at hand. It is a form of coping that has gone way beyond fingernail biting, has gone into to hurting themselves.
It's like their inward pain is so bad.
Yes, it manifests outside.
This is a way for them to actually feel it. And I think for some young people, too, I've heard that it's also a control issue.
It is control. No, it's a control issue. They want boundaries. They want constraints. They want that control aspect because, for goodness sakes, they can't even control their own lives. They want to know that at least the people who are over them know that they're willing to do whatever they can to help them. Most people don't. Most kids don't talk. This is what they tell me. Chad, my parents don't have time for me.
Right.
He said, they're always on the phone. They're always working. They're always trying to do this and do that. I wish that they would just take time and listen to me. Not talk, listen.
Checking their Facebook status. Yeah.
That has been probably one of the single most detrimental things, I think, to the family unit is this social individualism to where we're all together. I tell my kids, you cannot have your iPhone at the dinner table. You cannot have your iPhone at church. Turn it off. Give it to me. I will throw it across the room.
Yeah.
I said, this is our time together. And you have to make some real boundaries, and they're tough decisions, but you know what? They love it.
Okay, what about bullying? Because we're hearing a lot about that today, and that's like
horrible.
Even the whole social networking thing can play into that, because when I was in school, if somebody didn't like me, maybe a handful of people knew it.
Right.
If they had something bad to say about me, a handful of people might have known it. But today, if somebody doesn't like you,
it's a problem.
They tell the whole world. So talk to us about that a little.
One click of a button and your whole life can be exposed. And the bullying thing, I read an article that there's over 148, 150 million fake Facebook accounts. Fake. That have nothing to do. Somebody is hiding. Somebody is creating these accounts to be used as a bully pulpit, to use to facilitate the hatred, aggravation, racism, whatever. But we've had girls in our church who have gone through this moment of indiscretion, got themselves in a problem, pictures taken of them, posted on Facebook. The thing makes the social media rounds, and the kids are devastated. They are completely demoralized, and they begin to consider suicide. I said, my gosh, this has gone way beyond what it would ever have been. Yeah. I tell my son all the time, remember, when you post it online, it's for the world to see. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to take those words back, especially in the digital age. You just can't go forward and re-unsend the text.
Well, you know, we all want, crave, need acceptance.
Yes.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, this whole rejection thing is hard enough for a healthy adult, let alone for a teenager who's still trying to find out who they are. And so even as parents, I think we need to go the extra mile to make our children feel good about themselves, to compliment them. And, you know, obviously every generation, whatever child you're raising, they're a lot different than you were when you were coming up. And it's very easy to look at them and think, well, you know, that looks stupid. What you're wearing looks stupid. You know, your hair looks stupid. Your habits are stupid. And yes, things can get out of line and they need to have some direction and some correction, but we need to be a little more accepting of people as they are and realize that a lot of young people are just trying to fit in where they're at.
They are. They're just wanting to be accepted, and they'll do whatever they can to fit into a particular group. Look at gangs, look at social cliques and some of the things that go on. But I'd always tell my children, I said, look, don't base your popularity on the amount of likes or followers you have on some of your social media, because those are not real numbers. I said, your real friends, the people who love you, are the people who communicate with you face to face, who spend time with you, who are willing to tell you the hard things, and to tell you the truth even when it hurts. And it's tough to find that.
Well, you know, Chad, let's talk in the few minutes we have left about how a person's mind affects them in this area. You know, I wrote a book, Battlefield of the Mind, which has been very popular, and we've turned that into Battlefield of the Mind for teens as well as Battlefield of the Mind for kids, but we're talking about the one for teenagers today. Do teenagers need to learn how to think?
Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? The stinking thinking thing's a problem. My children battle with issues of the mind as every other human does on the face of the planet, understanding that the battle that rages is not necessarily with an enemy that you can fight, that you can see. It's these thoughts, it's these ideas based on what has happened, or a number of that. My son loves Battlefield of the Mind for teenagers. He loves it because he understands it. He's a thinking child. And some of the ideas that you lay down there are very practical, whether you're 90 or whether you're 15. And I think the battle for the mind of a teenager begins at home. There has to be words of life spoken over them. We have to accept them. We can't control everything they do. We have to choose our battles with them. But as we let them know that there is a safe haven at home and that the authority structure is sound and we love them, that automatically puts a wall up around their mind to where the enemy then loses some of his momentum to where he can't come in and begin to sow those seeds and break down the wall mentally that we have set up with love, faith, and in the Word with our kids.
Well, you know, there's something that just keeps coming to my heart, so I want to take a moment and just say it. You know, I think especially as Christian parents that when it comes to us verbalizing what we don't like about what our children are doing, I think that it's important that we learn how to look at what's sin and look at that in one way compared to what I just don't like as a parent.
That's good.
I think that a lot of times Christian parents can have all these ideas of what they think their children should be. I know I did. I mean, I wanted them to pray like I prayed and study like I studied. And, you know, we want them to dress like we dress and talk like we talk. And the bottom line is you have to give them room to be themselves. So it's one thing if my child is doing something sinful, then I always want to bring some correction and direction to that. But if it's just a matter of me not liking their hairstyle, then like you said before, we got to choose our battles. Maybe that's a battle that I don't want to fight. And I think that there's nothing worse than nagging somebody all the time. The Bible actually says that we should not break a child's spirit by undue chastisement. So anyway, that just kept coming to me, and I just felt like I needed to say it, that, you know, as a Christian parent, make sure that what you're correcting your children about is actually something that Jesus is having something to say about in His Word, and not just
not a cultural divide.
Not just a cultural thing. You know, let me just end with this thought. You know, it's not really so much what everybody else thinks of me that matters. It's what I think of me that matters. And if I know what God thinks of me, and I can learn to think like God thinks, then I'm going to make it through all the bad things that everybody else might think. We all need that as adults, and certainly our young people need that. So any help that you can give us today with your special gift to reach hurting people around the globe, we would certainly appreciate it. God bless you.